All right, thank you everyone for joining us today. We're really happy that you're here and that you've made the time to learn about academic publication. My name is Avi Stamen, and I am the CEO of Academic Language Experts. I want to thank you for joining us today for the second installment of our Publication Success interview series, where every month I speak with an innovative thought leader in the field of academic publishing about how they're influencing research. Today, I will interview Mathias Astell, Chief Journal Development Officer at Hindawi. We'll then take a look at upcoming events and finish with a selected question and answer from you, our audience. We're especially excited for the event today as we have the privilege of announcing our new partnership with Hindawi Publishers to help authors publish their research. I want to thank Mathias, Fanny, Kelly, and the entire Hindawi team for helping us make this such a big success. We urge you not to be shy and ask your questions on the Zoom chat. Your questions and feedback are important to us, and we will try to answer as many questions as possible. However, due to the size, we might not be able to get to every question today. If you have a personal question or want to discuss your specific research, you can reach out to any of the Academic Language Expert staff members who have ALE at the end of their names, and they will be happy to help you. Whatever we can't answer during the session, we're happy to set a time to discuss with you in the upcoming days. The interview will be approximately 45 minutes and the question and answer another 15 minutes. I encourage you to stick around for the Q&A because sometimes those are the most important parts and questions that really will address some of your concerns or questions. This interview is being recorded and we'll send anyone who registered a copy within 72 hours after the event. Feel free to go back and watch parts again or share with any of your colleagues who you think might benefit. Before we kick off the event and meet Mathias, I want to share some of our exciting achievements from the last year with you. 2020 was a challenging year for academics around the world, but we pulled together and are grateful and proud to have helped scholars translate, edit, and prepare their research in over 50 languages. Articles we worked on were published with top academic publishers, including Cambridge University Press, Harvard University Press, and of course, Hindawi. We helped hundreds of authors to publish their articles in respected academic journals across the full spectrum of academia, from history and philosophy to biology and engineering. It is our mission to help scholars and authors achieve their dream publications and be a source of guidance and support throughout their journey. And now, without further ado, I want to introduce you to Mathias Astell. After years working in higher education colleges, Mathias moved into academic publishing in 2013, joining Sage Publications. Since then, he has worked at Nature Publishing Group, Springer Nature, and BMJ with responsibility for driving engagement for some of the world's largest and leading open access journals, including Scientific Reports, Scientific Data, and BMG Open. He is currently Chief Journal Development Officer at Hindawi, helping to ensure researchers receive the best possible service and experience when publishing, editing, reviewing, and reading Hindawi journals. Throughout his career, he has been consistently involved in various elements of open science, primarily open access and open data, and also has a keen interest in metrics, persistent identifiers, author services, equity in research, and various other community-led initiatives. Mathias, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Avi. Thanks for having me. It's nice to be here.
Oh, yeah. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us, and we look forward to hearing some of your insights. I know you have a lot to say. So like I said before, I encourage anyone who would like, check in via the chat, tell us who you are, where you're coming from, what your area of research is. Who knows? Maybe there'll be a new collaboration that comes out of today's event. All right, so I want to start by just doing a bit of a warm-up, if that's okay with you, Mathias. And I'd like to run a few polls. I want to get a temperature for the audience in the room. I want to see who's here with us today, what's important to them, and how they publish the research. So I'm going to launch a poll right now. Hopefully, everyone can now see it up on your screen. The first question, I'm going to read the questions out loud because for some reason in the recording they don't show up. So I'll read them out loud and take your time to answer as you go through. So how many articles have you published in peer-reviewed journals? So we can get a feel for, sort of who, the experience of the researchers in the room and how they handle their publishing. All right, brilliant. We're gonna move on.
Nice. It's a good spread.
Here, so let's share the results. So it looks like we've got a really nice spread actually between scholars who have, or maybe are a little bit newer to the field and scholars who have significant experience, 20 plus articles. So it looks like we've got a nice range. All right. Okay. All right, next question is about how you prepare your research. I'm going to assume that the majority of scholars here are English native, are publishing in English language journals. So are you writing in your mother tongue and sending for translation? Are you writing in English and sending to an editor, or you don't need any help with translating or editing? You just go about writing and sending in? Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much. So it looks like the majority of the scholars here are writing their papers in English and then sending to an editor, which is very interesting. Some do translation and some don't need any help. Yep. Well, I said the results, but I didn't share them. So now I'll share the results so everyone can see them up on your screen. All right. And last but not least, thank you everyone for your patience. When do you plan on submitting your next article for publication? Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much. And all right, interesting. So it looks like most of the people, about 63% in total, will be planning on submitting an article in the next 3 months. So this is going to be very practical, especially for those scholars, and even those who might need a bit more time to get their research ready. I'm sure you'll find a lot of helpful tips in today's session. Okay, great. Okay, fantastic, brilliant. So that was great, because I think that gave us a little bit of an impression of who's with us today and what sort of help they might need. All right, so let's kick this off. Mathias, can you just get us started? Tell us a little bit about Hindawi in general and your role as Chief Journal Development Officer. What exactly does that mean, and what does your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, not a problem. So Hindawi is a fully open access publisher. So that means that all of our journals publish gold open access, so immediately open access articles. We have about 230 journals, just over, that cover all areas of STM, so science, technology, medicine, and so on. We publish roughly 20,000 articles a year from researchers from all over the world. And we have a number of partnerships with other publishers in which we support them in publishing journals open access. So we have one with Wiley Publishing, we have one with Cambridge University Press, and another agreement with Sage Publications, which is facilitating facilitating publishers moving their journals from subscription into open access publishing. My group, so I head up a group, the journal development group, and that's responsible for journal management. So effectively working closely with our chief editors and editorial boards to make sure that our journals are serving the communities that they are in, and that they have the support and the understanding to provide that service to our authors. But we also work on supporting our reviewers and our readers to best understand the content that is in our journals, find content, carry out reviews in an efficient manner. So anything related to journal policy, journal management, or journal growth sits within my group.
Got it. Okay, fantastic. That's great. So I'm going to try and focus our interview today on questions that will be really relevant to scholars who are looking to publish their research. And so I want to start off with a question that struck me when I heard about what you do, which is, to what, how important is it when an author is going about looking, for a journal to publish in, how critical is it for them to look at the publisher? Should they even pay attention to the publisher at all? Meaning, in the end of the day, what's really important in terms of, impact factor, in terms of the influence of, their article is what specific journal they're publishing in. Do I even need to take stock of who the publisher is? And if so, why is that important?
I think the primary consideration should always be the journal itself. So is the scope right? Do they agree with and can they conform to any journal policies? Are the journal metrics, so you said impact factor there, but other journal level metrics available, and are they in line with the author and the author group's expectation? Is there available data on the times that it takes to publish in the journal, what their acceptance rates are, so on. So these should always be the main considerations for authors, and I think authors are pretty au fait with that as the starting point. But that said, different publishers provide different levels of service, right? And different publishers have different standards. We're a fully open access publisher, and therefore when you come to a Hindawi journal that you are publishing open access. But there are also different checks, steps, support that are provided by different publishers. For example, we offer artificial intelligence language editing to all of our submitting authors as standard without charge. That runs across all of our journals. So that is a publisher-led initiative that provides a standard for all of our journals. So there are considerations to which publisher that go beyond the journal itself. The journal is always primary, and publishers use different systems and they use different processes by which to manage rigor and ethical quality and so on. So I think those tend to be standardized across a publisher, even though the journals within them will have their own unique and individual ways of approaching them. I mean, so we use our own manuscript system, which is built open source and is built using modern principles, and so fully streamlined, really looking at the author as the core user, whereas historically many publishers were set up for the editor to be the core user. Obviously still a core user of ours, but the author was secondary in the subscription world. So there are considerations to play in there. And finally, I would say on a policy front, there are journal level policies, but then there are also publisher level policies. So at Springer Nature, we implemented a large number of data availability and data sharing policies that would be standardized across journals. And similarly at Hindawi, we have a standard waiver policy that runs across all of our journals. So we have 100% waivers provided to a set of 75 or so countries that are automatically applied. So that works as standard and is led by the publisher rather than by the journal. So there are considerations.
Got it. Okay. All right. So I want to dig a little bit deeper into, this question of what, when you say, putting the author at the center of the process, like what that looks like. But before we get there, I just want a little bit more background for our audience today. Can you just tell us a little bit about, what are Hindawi's main, fields of expertise, and are there any fields that you're either moving into or you see as being of critical importance, in the near future? What scholars should be like looking at Hindawi to start with?
Yeah, so we cover all of science, technology, and medicine, but we have real strength in the physical sciences, engineering, mathematics. We were the first mainstream publisher to publish large journals, open access journals within those areas. So we lead in terms of open access journals in those areas that perhaps are not as open as, say, in the biomedical fields. And so those are real cores for us: engineering, computer sciences, physical sciences, chemistry. We have a lot of good biomedical titles, but biomedicine was the first to move towards open access and is much further down the trial, whereas physical sciences are coming along, but we've got a good almost 20 years experience publishing in open access in those areas, and so that's really where we have a lot of differentiation from some of the other leading publishers.
Got it. And have you seen any changes or trends in publishing over the last year since the corona pandemic has hit? Has it has it changed your work process or your workflow in any way, or has it changed in terms of how many submissions you're getting to journals in certain topics? Are you fast tracking any research, to get it out there earlier? How has Corona sort of changed your policies?
I mean, it's obviously been difficult for people globally in regards to adjusting to the way that the world is now structured, and things are starting to open up, but it will continue for a good period of time. And I think our reaction to that was wanting to help researchers as much as possible, be able to still carry out their research, but also not have the added pressures of the usual timelines that work along with publishing. And so we very early on in March of last year confirmed that we would allow all extensions on all papers. We saw an increased request for extensions, obviously people having different constraints on the time. We also wanted to help in the publication of research that would tackle the pandemic, and so we fully waived all charges to articles related to COVID of any kind. We signed up with the Wellcome Trust commitments to make sure that the details and data of any published article in relation to COVID were shared directly with the World Health Organization and made immediately available on PubMed Central. And we also led a formation of publishers to drive an initiative to maximize peer review for the papers by gathering together reviewers that were available to carry out rapid review so that things could be published as quickly and as openly as possible. And inside our own workflows, we did streamline COVID papers and set up new workflows to move those through as fast as possible.
Got it, great. So I want to get back for a second to what you mentioned earlier about putting the author as the focal point of your process. Before we get to how you do that, can you just describe for us what are the most common critiques and complaints that you get, or that journals in general get from authors? What are some of their biggest frustrations that you identified? I know that we gave some of the audience here the ability, the chance also to express some of the things that were most frustrating to them, that I shared with you also. So can you just talk about what some of the pain points, some of the things that are most difficult, and then of course what you and the Hindawi team, how you went about, addressing some of those issues in an impactful way?
Yeah, I think primarily communication is a large one, and an understanding of what is happening with papers in the process, and I think perhaps a lack of, or a perceived lack of response from journal and editorial staff when a paper is in process. Really, a large number of the complaints or not complaints, but questions and complaints are around the transparency of the process and understanding what is happening, and even prior to that, what is required of an author beforehand. So confusing policies or guidelines are areas in which authors find themselves having to come back and repeatedly ask the same questions, or they have a manuscript stuck that just says out for review, not a particularly useful status, and really wanting to know, okay, well, where about is my paper? What is happening with my paper? And I think that in terms of the communication and responsiveness, in some ways, there's largely a systems issue there. A lot of the systems that publishers use are relatively outdated. They were built 15, 20 years ago, and then have been incrementally developed on, and so perhaps don't always utilize the kind of immediate response that people expect nowadays. But it's something that was at the front of our mind when we were building our new open source system, to be able to ensure that everyone using the system, not just authors but editors and reviewers, can all see what is happening with a paper and when. But I think really there's an overarching issue around transparency and really making sure that, I think a lot of the complaints that authors have could be resolved by being much more transparent and upfront and clear at the point prior to submission, and then at the point of submission. I think there's not really a great amount of reason for the lack of transparency that persists across journals. I think a lot of it is historical. It's just kind of built up over time. But in reality, by making information upfront and available as soon as possible, it reduces the requirement for journal staff and editorial staff to answer questions that usually are available somewhere. The answers are available somewhere, but they're just not obviously available. Although there are some areas like acceptance rates and publication times and article processing charges where they're either not publicly available or they're intentionally buried. And it seems that in reality, making those things up front is beneficial for everybody. And that's the step that we've taken, is to be as open and transparent as possible about all the data relating to a journal or a manuscript submission or similar.
So I think it would be helpful if you dug a little deeper into those three areas that you mentioned before. Even if you could just simply define each one and how it is maybe that you're doing things, and what the general standard is in the field, and then sort of maybe how you're doing things either similarly or differently. I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think in terms of communication, we're really looking to make sure that the system which manages manuscript processing and manuscript submissions and peer review and so on is responsive and communicative to all members involved. And so that's not just better automating the messages, but also providing clear visibility of the stages that manuscripts are at, which sounds like something simple, but is actually not particularly widespread within the industry. Things will get stuck at a set number of statuses, and it becomes confusing and frustrating, especially if then a paper is rejected, and the reasons for those are also less clear. There's time wasted. And so a large part of our tackling that issue is both ensuring that our staff are well trained in how to communicate and being responsive, but also that our systems take a lot of that load.
So on a very practical level, what does that mean? The acceptance percentage and response time are up on, if I'm looking at a Hindawi journal, I'll know approximately how long people are going to get, it'll take for them to get back to me, or approximately what percentage of articles that are submitted to said journal are published. Is that, just getting very practical for a minute?
Yeah. I mean, even more than that. So upfront, our approach to transparency is that all pricing, all timeframes, all acceptance rates, and all journal metrics are immediately visible to everybody. Right? They go to our journal; they're not hidden anywhere. They're right there upfront. But then also, once a paper is submitted within the system, we then make it very clear with simple traffic light processes. Your paper is at this stage and it's being handled by these people, or looked at by these reviewers, or the editor is carrying out this step at this time, which just in itself reduces the requirement to send emails to ask what is happening with my paper, which is what will happen in many systems, and many systems that I've worked with at the other publishers I've been at. And really that's just a kind of a throwback to the fact that there wasn't so many there wasn't such a consistency of authors submitting into these set systems, and whereas now authors have an expectation of understanding. Well, okay, if I don't know what stage the paper is at, I'm not going to know whether I need to go to another journal. I'm not going to know what steps I need to take, and then you end up with this kind of email communication outside of a system that should be designed to give that visibility to all researchers that are involved, the editor, author, and reviewer. And I think similarly that goes with guidelines and formatting and all these kind of things that are somewhat anachronistic, but in reality could be very easily standardized or removed. And at Hindawi, we don't require formatting or a standard structure of articles for submission for any of our journals, because it's an anachronistic setup that was based around printing and typesetting that doesn't exist anymore. There's no requirement for it in the digital world. But those kind of confusing guidelines or those confusing restrictions are still in place in many journals, just primarily for historical reasons.
Got it. Okay. So does that mean that means that there's no formatting required at any point, or just when upon initial submission?
So it's not required at any point until post acceptance, and then even at acceptance, we see it as part of our role as the publisher, the publishing support, to do that formatting process in conjunction with the author. But it is the publishing staff that will structure the article ready for publication online, and the author obviously reviews proofs, and we have multiple proof stage review, which is not always a standard within the publishing industry either. But we see it as that there's no reason for authors to spend their time formatting papers, or formatting papers and then getting rejected and going to another journal and having to format it in a different way and then getting rejected and go to another journal. You're just adding unnecessary strain when authors are, and all researchers are, already pretty time poor. And so I think a large part of what we're trying to do and what we see as a vital role of the publisher is removing those time constraints. So that's where transparency and visibility plays an amazing role, because if you are transparent and clear at the front, people don't have to waste time finding out things. But also these anachronistic pieces around structure or formatting, we've stripped them out.
Great. Interesting. Okay, so I in addition to sort of the issues that you've brought up here, I know that one of the ways that this needs to be dealt with is sort of taking a step back and looking at some of the data and looking at the big picture, and not just looking at individual complaints, but seeing sort of as a whole, what do scholars really need to support them in the publication process. So can you tell us if you've taken any time to take a step back and look at maybe sort of the bigger numbers, and have there been any insights that you received that maybe influenced how you work vis-a-vis authors, that give you an insight that maybe other publishers haven't yet caught on to, let's say?
So we are very geographically diverse in our author base, and we also have the benefit of being very tech and data driven, right? So we have the ability to see a large amount of useful data about our authors and see that they are geographically spread. And I think one of the main things that I saw when I came to Hindawi is just how many of our authors are not native English speakers, and the difficulties that inherently has within it, and the ways in which we as a publisher can remove that barrier. I feel like our role is to remove the hurdles that are placed in front of people, and it's editors' roles to ensure that the quality and the rigor of the science that is being published is to the standard that is expected by the community. And so when we looked at it, I think often we found that articles were being incorrectly rejected or turned for major revisions based on language, which is a very difficult thing to see at many other publishers, because it's fractious. It's usually based. There's lots of individual journal reporting, not this kind of top-level holistic view that the Hindawi has the benefit of. And so that was a large part in our drive to provide language editing support through an AI tool directly to researchers, but also working with author services providers such as ALE to give those more in-depth services to authors as and when they're required, and at discounted rates as we can get. So I think it's given us a good understanding that the growth in non-English language speaking countries, the research coming out of them is rapid, right? It's massive, and that there shouldn't be, again, historical constraints put on the ways in which those can be assessed and published. I think a smaller point is also around pricing within open access. This is obviously can be relatively contentious. You're asking people to pay to publish and so on, although that's technically not correct, but that's a perception. And many publishers shy away from making those costs explicit. But I'm a firm believer that there are no benefits to doing that. You're not going to suddenly spring it on somebody and say, actually, you need to pay for this. Everybody should be as upfront and transparent as possible about that. And that's not just putting the pricing on the website, that's making it clear in the confirmation of submission letters. That's making it clear at each stage throughout so that people understand. And also making it clear what support is available to them if they don't have funding. So I said that we provide those automatic waivers. We run a discretionary waiver program as well. So if people are within countries that are perceived to be high earning countries, they can still apply for waivers based on certain areas. So I think being upfront about that information has also, from a publisher perspective, reduced the number of queries we get about that, reduced the amount of pushback that we get, because people understand upfront. And the same with turnaround times, and the same with and journal metrics. If you put those up front, people aren't going to either be surprised by them or question them further down the line.
So in terms of getting back to the question of editing, do you have an expectation that scholars will edit their research before they send in? Is it okay for scholars to submit their research pre-editing and then maybe, look into editing services after it's been reviewed? Like, where on the timeline does that come in an ideal sense?
So like I said, we don't think language should be a hurdle to the publication, but research needs to be communicated in a way that is understandable. And the standard is in English. So language is important. And so while we recognize that most authors don't have English as their first language, the requirement to publish in English means that I think all authors should find a way to have some kind of English language check. Now, whether that's paid for, or whether that's a colleague, or throughout the process, I think if it removes a lot of unnecessary issues if that editing or that review has been done prior to first submission. It can happen throughout the review process, but the difficulty there is that if something is reviewed and found to be difficult to comprehend, and therefore getting in the way of the sciences, the findings themselves, then that can disadvantage the actual scientific assessment of the paper. And so while it may be that revision comes back and requests that the English language is changed, it has a kind of dual benefit to having that language assessment done prior to submission, in that the research can be better understood and assessed, and it won't fall at this language hurdle.
Yeah, I'll just add from my own personal experience that there are excellent writers who just need help with the language, and there are poor English writers who for whom English is their native tongue. Meaning, good writing and high-level English don't always go together. So I think there's always two things that we need to consider. Is the research written clearly in terms of is it coherent? Is there a flow? Are the different sections are they connected well? Which, if that's the case, then the English language, part is simpler to do. If the whole article needs to be, sort of rethought or teased out or restructured, then even if you have a brilliant English editor, you may still have more work to do at the end. So I think that's an important distinction that we don't always think about.
I think that is very important, and I think that's what I was trying to get to in the language. Shouldn't be a barrier to the science, So, but if the science has issues, or the structure of the way that science is communicated has issues, that's separate from language. Language might play a role in that, but there are other elements.
Yeah, one of the things I also like about your website when I was sort of snooping around is that oftentimes the website itself can be a determinant for sending in, because the language on the website is either unclear or sends you to different pages, and can be very confusing. So I think that's also an important, thing to consider as publishers. Can you make the process, the onboarding process, I just want to submit my article, what am I supposed to do, A, B, C, D, simpler and more clear. That language I think also makes a big difference in the author experience and being able to submit with confidence.
Well, I think that is kind of at the core of our idea of putting the researcher at the heart of what we do, is that thinking of how the person is going to interact with the journal, not thinking of the journal as its own standalone thing that does it the way that it wants to. But what are the best ways to create processes and experiences for the people that are going to interact with it, be that authors, readers, editors, or reviewers? And I think streamlining processes and standardizing them as much as possible is beneficial from a processing point of view for the publisher. It means that we can keep timeframes down, turnaround times lower, but it also means that it's easy and understandable for authors coming to journals, or readers trying to find content. I think the kind of idiosyncratic nature of many journals has built up over time, and then it's fiercely defended as, well, this is what makes us unique. But in reality, what matters is the understandability and the accessibility of the research and of the content that the journal publishes. So there's being able to align those things is really important, and means that there's no additional blockers to finding, reading, accessing, sharing content.
Got it. All right. I wanna get to the third part of our discussion, and before we wrap up, and I want to go back into the question of open access, and I want to push back a little bit. I talk to a lot of scholars who say to me, listen, even if open access, I might believe in the ideal, right? I might believe that research should be shared with everybody, and that anyone who wants to have if my institution is paid for this research to be conducted, they shouldn't need to pay again to have access to it. And I don't want to come across big paywalls every time I want to read an article in my field. All that makes sense. But in the end of the day, if my university or if my government doesn't support paying for these open access journals, what ends up happening is that it's an additional burden on me as a scholar, as a researcher, to find more money than I would have had to otherwise to publish my article. And it maybe even discourages me from trying to publish there. So how would you respond to a scholar who's in such a situation? And both from your publishing hat, but also do you see in the upcoming years any sort of support system which will help such scholars to be able to publish their research without having to fork out exuberant sums? I mean, I don't know if you saw this, but Nature is now asking per article 9,500 euro for open access per article. And hopefully there are those among us who can easily afford that. But my guess is that the majority of us don't have an extra 9,500 euro lying around for an article. So I know that's not how Hindawi works, but I'm just curious what you think of the field. What you think of this.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think price and availability and ability to pay prices is an important consideration. I think our average cost per article is around $1,200, so nowhere near those Nature prices. I mean, if I could, those are eye-watering. But I mean, they make their own justifications for why those prices are charged. And I mean, I worked at Nature Research for a time, and there's a lot of good internal staff there that do a lot of good work. But I think there's going to be a sea shift that happens, right? Supporting the publication of open access research. There is a lot of drive towards open access publication, and rightly so. The benefits of publishing open access and of content being open access are massive. Right? They enable not just articles to be easier to find and read and give greater visibility to the research that's being published, but they have much more far-reaching impact of the actual metadata of research being openly accessible and understandable, and really tackling reproducibility crises. There's so much more than just it's not behind a paywall that goes into open access. But that doesn't answer the question of a researcher that is stuck with a short budget. And I think part of that is an understanding and a support by publishers to facilitate publication where funding isn't available. But it's part of a move of the burden from one area to another within the research ecosystem. Because I mean, within closed journals, it's not as though there's not a price being levied on those articles. They're just being levied in a different place in the research infrastructure. And I think in reality, the comparative cost as a whole, it's more beneficial, and there's greater return through the open access route than there is through a subscription route. I think we
Why
need to be.
Is that?
Well, because when content is behind a paywall, we actually reinforce the ability to access it, which then reinforces the divides of rich versus not rich, access versus not access, and those same researchers are being disadvantaged at a different end. So yeah, that maybe they can't publish their research, but they're not able to read the things that are going to enable them to be the leading researchers in their areas, because they can only get access to certain content in certain ways. And so it's a bit of a rob and Peter to pay Paul question. Now, the difficulty is that in countries where there are funders or funding infrastructures, it's much easier to say, well, the burden is passed onto those funders and not the individual author. In much of the low and middle income countries, and many of the countries outside of, frankly, Europe and North America, the expectation is that individual researchers or their individual labs will pay those costs. And so I think we do need to be smarter about how do we price and support researchers in those types of situations. I don't have the magic answer. If I did, I'd be much better positioned than I am now. Well, I mean, but I think there is a continuous conversation about that. We were part of the Plan S pricing transparency group that were looking at, okay, well, what are the services that go into publishing an open access article, and how can we make it clear to authors these are the things, and their institutions and their funders, these are the elements that are being covered by these costs, and these are the benefits and the outgoings. And I think a greater visibility, a greater transparency, as I've talked throughout this, is required, and will naturally happen. And there are the benefits, as I say, outweigh the negatives of moving to open access, but we need to be better at communicating that, and it's supporting all segments of the research population, not just those that have large funding.
Got it. Okay, excellent. I had it was news maybe what was it, about a month ago or 6 weeks ago, that Hindawi was purchased by Wiley, who I'm sure is a well-known name for serious researchers who are looking to publish their research. So how does that impact your work? Do you think that you'll be able to take some of what you've done at Hindawi and infuse it in what's going on at Wiley? And what does that mean for some of the researchers who publish with Hindawi?
So in many ways, we remain autonomous as Hindawi, and all the standards and practices and processes and the transparency and so on that we employ will continue as is, and there's no immediate impact on our authors or editors or our journals as standard. I think what it does do is it really signals Wiley's dedication to an open future for research, and a drive towards supporting the open publication of research across not just STM but more widely. And I think we bring a lot of the disruption that is required to shake up those historical constraints and those idiosyncrasies that I've touched on throughout our interview, that exist in all traditional publishers. And Wiley has been one of the most, and continues to be one of the most progressive of the big publishers. They're leading in many areas of open research, and I think it's a really great and exciting opportunity to take what we've done at making processes and systems that really focus on the researcher, and helping to drive Wiley's ambitions in those areas.
Right. Okay. I wanna wrap up our conversation, because I see there are some really great questions here, which I think are going to be really relevant for everyone in the audience. So let's just a big thank you. You're not going anywhere just yet, but a thank you for all the information you've shared thus far. I'm going to share my screen now, and I'm going to put up for everyone our contact info, both my own and Mathias's contact info, where you can learn more about Hindawi. And I know Fanny has been putting up links throughout the process. But if you have a specific question that pertains to one of us, please do feel free to reach out. Mathias is more on the publication and journal level. For us, it's more about language, so that's translation, editing, formatting for specific journals, as well as anyone who needs academic guidance or academic review, needs another pair of eyes or help in guiding them towards publication. So you can be in touch with me for that. Feel free to jot down my email and be in touch as appropriate. There's also I also put a link in the chat to a Calendly link, which is a calendar link where you can actually book a meeting directly on that app with me at your convenience. So feel free to go ahead and do that. And I know that Mathias and his team will try and get back to you as soon as possible if you're in touch with them. So, take advantage, even if you don't have something that's, currently relevant right now. It's definitely worthwhile to take the time to go ahead and do that. I will stop sharing my screen now. Okay, all right. So I'll give everyone a minute to just jot that down in case they want to, and then we'll finish it off with some of the Q&A. I see here that there's a question. Oh no, excuse me. One more thing before we get to that. Which is quite important. Is I'd like to share with everybody our upcoming live events. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen one more time. Thank you for your patience. Okay, so everyone can see here are the upcoming events. I'm gonna put a link, Aviva, if you can put a link in the chat for the upcoming events, that would be great. You'll see here that coming up in March, next month already, in a few weeks, we're gonna be having a conversation with Chris Harrison, who's the Publication Director of Humanities and Social Sciences at Cambridge University Press. He's going to be talking about a new model for academic publication, which for research that falls somewhere between books and articles, sort of that gap in between. And is there room for a new publication model? And I think that should be fascinating. In April, we're going to have a conversation with Cedric Cohen-Scully, who's a professor at Haifa University, who we recently translated his book. And we're going to be having a roundtable with him, Professor Jonathan Dechter, and Sylvia Fuchs, who is actually the head of Brandeis University Press, at the editorial director of Brandeis University Press. And we're going to talk about a little bit about Cedric's book, as well as sort of a behind-the-scenes look at the book publication process, what it looks like, and how that works. And then we've got upcoming events with further events about open access, about how to spread your research after it's been published. So take a minute and please do look at some of those events, and if any of them do interest you, please go ahead and register and sign up. I see here that Aviva has added the link, so that's great. Okay, let's get to some of the questions. So I see we have a question from Jonathan. Jonathan, would you mind sharing your question with us? You'll have to. I'm here. Okay. Yeah. You'll just need to unmute yourself, and then you should be able to go. I think you're still on mute for now. There you go.
Right. Hi, everyone. So my question is about the reviewing process, and how do you ensure the quality of the reviewers? And in that same context, what do you do when two reviewers have opposing reviews?
It's a great question, Jonathan. So we work with the Publons reviewer suggester service from which is a service provided by Clarivate, which helps us to identify reviewers based on the content of articles. That enables us to make sure that they're as closely aligned to the area of review as possible. We leave it within the gift of our editors to decide how many reviewers are invited, but we require a minimum of 2 review reports before a decision can be made. When there are 2 opposing review decisions, either that will be, then the third tiebreaker will be made by the editor, or additional reviews will be called for. As I say, we as a publisher, we don't involve ourselves in the specifics of the review process, but instead create the environment in which a robust review process can be carried out. So that's finding the reviewers, ensuring their relevance and quality. I think in terms of the one area which we do ensure the robustness of the review process and of reviewers' comments is that we have an additional stage post-acceptance that most publishers don't have, which is called editorial quality assessment, which goes back and looks at all stages of the peer review process. So the reviewers that were contacted, the review reports that came in, the decisions made by the editors, and if there are any revisions in there, how that happened. And the reason that we do that is to do effectively a double check to make sure that all decisions made are in line with accepted standards. So it's not that the reviewers both said reject and then the editor accepted it. That's actually technologically not possible within our system. But also that the quality of those reviews are clear and understandable, and really ensure the rigor of the review process.
Thank you.
Great. All right, so we've got a few anonymous questions, so I will ask on their behalf. Thank you for your question. If I have a piece of research, but I'm not sure where the best place to publish it is, any suggestions for how I start doing that process of sorting through different, first of all, finding journals and then sorting through and figuring out which one would be most appropriate for me? Yeah,
so I mean, there's a wealth of information available about journals. We actually have some really useful guidance on how to find the journals within our portfolios that are the most relevant to you. I think the fact that we make all that data about journals upfront immediately makes it much more easy to understand, okay, well, these are the times I'd be expecting, these are the areas I'd be expecting. I think there is still great value in talking to colleagues, in talking to co-authors and developing an understanding. But then there are many journal support tools out there that will assist in understanding, okay, this is the scope of a journal, this is the areas in which they publish. So there are lots of resources available. Often it's finding where they are. I think, as I said, we provide a full guide on how to identify the right scope for your journal, what elements are to check out. So if you are struggling, there's definitely support there. And I think also simply contacting the journal is one that authors often overlook. And I would say journal staff are actually very open to providing information about what is relevant to their journal or not.
Great. Okay. And we got another question here about who in the context of open access, who usually funds the payment for open access, and who should, if I'm a scholar, who should I be turning to see if open access is available to me via my institution?
So your librarian is always a good area to start. They've moved into better understanding and supporting funding applications and requirements. I mean, it varies from institution to institution. There are also a number of good tools now available. Plan S, Coalition S has produced one, so has the Gates Foundation through their Cronus hub that will provide information on what funding is potentially available to you based on your research area, your institution, and so on. So there are tools available out there if you have no idea where to start with funding and support of open access funding, there are tools available that will point you in the right direction. There's also one from Sherpa Romeo. Yeah, I'd say those are the 3 best ones to look at.
Great, fantastic. All right, I think this will wrap it up. Mathias, I will really want to thank you for your time and your insight and sort of walking us through, maybe, you know, pulling the curtain back on what the publication process looks like, you know, from an insider's perspective. I know I learned a lot today, and I imagine that everyone in attendance did as well. You know, like I said, everyone is welcome to be in touch with us afterwards if you have any questions or feedback. We will be sending the recording, as I mentioned, within 48 to 72 hours. So, you know, look out for that, and feel free to share it, you know, in your department with your colleagues, and just to rewatch any parts that you wanna understand better. And yeah, be sure to check out, you know, Hindawi, be sure to check out Academic Language Experts. And if you do have a question or an inquiry, you know, don't hesitate to be in touch. So thanks again. We know it's not simple to get out in the middle of your day and take some time aside, but we hope that you got a lot out of it, and we look forward to seeing you at our upcoming events.
Thanks, Avi. I hope everyone found it useful and interesting.
Brilliant. All right. Cheers. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.